Well, for more details about this deal, let's now cross over to Washington, D.C. and speak to international affairs analyst Calvin Dark, who's on standby. Calvin, good to see you. There's a lot that's been happening on the global stage since President Trump got into office. Why do you think he chose to prioritize a peace deal in the Eastern DRC?
Well, yes, thank you for having me. I think that there are two factors to keep in mind, the immediate one and then the more long-term one. The immediate one is Donald Trump needs a win. He has not hid the fact that he thinks he deserves a Nobel Prize. And so he is looking for anything to maybe distract from the lack of progress that we've seen, say, in Ukraine, Russia, or some places in the Middle East. Now, apart from that immediate need for Donald Trump, we know that since January, he has really been laser focused on what he calls rare earths. We know that a lot of the minerals that are very important to technology are at the heart of this conflict. And we also know that some of Donald Trump's major supporters from the tech world have been in his ear about the advantage that the United States needs with these minerals, especially for the technology sector. We saw this as one of the first parties with Ukraine, one of their rare earth deals. So I think those are the two things that have kind of pushed Donald Trump to go for this, especially given everything else that's happening in the world.
And I'd like to get your comment on how his diplomacy approach differs from other diplomatic approaches. Some have described this one as transactional. What do you make of that? And will it yield, long-term results and peace?
Well, so here's my evaluation of that approach. Yes, it is very transactional. And I think that there are ways where that can be very good, because we know that when there's ideology, it's really hard to be flexible to reach an agreement. And if you're transactional, that ideology doesn't get in the way. And we've seen that maybe with the negotiations with Iran in the beginning, that not having an ideology was an advantage to Donald Trump. But there is a bad side to that. And that is because if he's approaching it as a business person, as a transaction, we know that there are so many different factors that don't have a dollar value. Things like history, culture, things like human rights. And oftentimes those are against the bottom line. And so I think that's where we have to kind of watch, because this isn't a simple real estate transaction that Donald Trump's used to. It's a lot more complicated.
What do you think, makes a difference this time around? Because there have been many attempts at getting a peace deal in the Eastern DRC. What do you think the United States, working together with Qatar, were able to do differently?
Well, I think that they were able to strip away some of the, I would say, ideology or the positions. And I mean, let's be frank. Presidents before Donald Trump, Republicans and Democrats, would have thought about the whole list of issues like human rights, like how to involve the different factions and groups. Donald Trump didn't do that. I also think that one of the things that's going to be very difficult with Qatar is he has really blurred the line between diplomacy as President Trump and the Trump family company that is doing business deals in Qatar. We know about the $400 million plane. Now, do those things affect this deal? We don't know. And I think that when you have a deal that there's so much at stake, when there's this kind of air of, well, who's in it for what, that kind of clouds the deal, especially the White House hasn't been that upfront with what exactly is in the deal, because when you run a company, you can do that. When you run a country, that's not the way that we get support behind deals such as this.
I mean, you've hinted at this already, but the finer details of the deal are unclear. But what are you hoping to see? What are you hoping will be captured, maybe even in terms of the nitty-gritties of implementation in this particular deal?
Well, I think that if Donald Trump's goal, for example, of getting an upper hand on China with these rare earths, I think that's a good thing. If it comes with protections that we just don't receive it, that there are benefits for the people in these countries so that we don't repeat past mistakes about taking the minerals and the wealth and not leaving a structure behind that promotes protection of human rights and good governance. I also think that if Donald Trump is able to position this to where we have real competition against China in Africa that we have been lacking for Democratic and Republican administrations, a lot of the critics in Washington that would normally criticize Donald Trump, his talk about Africa is a lot different than his talk about the rare earths in Africa. I think if there's a positive edge on China in this, I think that people might be a little bit more forgiving of the lack of details and the lack of follow through that he's promised. Because one other important point, at the same time that Donald Trump is proposing this deal that will require a lot of follow through to make sure it doesn't fall apart, he's also saying there's America first, he needs to pull back from the world. So how is that going to work in 2 or 3 years when somebody's going to need to come in and try to enforce this deal if he's pulled out of the region? So I think those are questions that people have in Washington.
Lots to think about there. Thank you for unpacking that for us. An international affairs analyst, Calvin Dark, there, joining us from Washington, D.C.